Okay. So so this is a class I've taught many times over many years, and the initial impetus was teaching conversion students, but I quickly realized that the interests and even maybe the need is a little broader than that, and so it's really open to everyone, and I hope will be of value to many. So that's that one piece of introduction. If you are in a process of conversion, I just sort of, it is upon you to schedule meetings with me one-on-one, 3 to 6 times, sorry, every 3 to 6 weeks, um, one-on-one, because this class is not, that is this class will be part of that process, but it is not sufficient. So that is on you. So I will not chase you because, right? So every 3 to 6 weeks, you should have a one-on-one meeting just to review your study and your progress and the process and all of that. Okay, I'm going to share first with those online. I'm going to share in the chat, and then I'll share with everyone in the room a sort of syllabus, a list of topics that we're going to cover, um, which, and then I'll share with those in the room as well. Okay, so you should have that. And then I think there should be copies for me, for all of you as well. It's 2 pieces of paper, 2 double-sided pieces of paper, the hard copy, okay? It should be collated, right? Right? Sorry, I did number the page. All right. I should up. When you have the right pages, it's two double-sided sheets. You took two of the same one. Yeah. Sorry, they were collated. I collated them. Sorry. Well, you took just swap with. All right. Sorry. Okay.
We can share. Okay, we can share.
Um,
Have that one. Yeah, yeah, no, sorry.
okay. Okay. All good. Okay. And there's also a reading list, which some of you've seen before. This is just books that I think are great. And okay. Yeah, but enough there. I can send. I can actually get. I don't need a hard copy if you. Okay. You got. Okay. So all right. Let's begin. Okay, we are now Roman numeral one. That's our first. The first topic, Roman numeral one, is sort of, I call it the history of the Torah. So it's sort of how I guess all the books that are behind me, how they came to how they came to be, and sort of the story that yeah, how we have the Torah. So the first in this section, and I guess if you prefer digital, I can send that to you as well. If you would you that be easier for you?
Oh, okay. I'm just taking notes.
Oh, fine. Would you like fine if you want a digital copy? Okay. Um, First section pre-Sinai. Okay, so if you, as we're in shul these weeks, we're reading about well, I guess even from the chapters of earliest chapters of Genesis, we see there is humanity's existing in a normative relationship with God. There are like normative expectations God has for humanity. We see that commanded in the prohibition against eating from the tree of knowledge. We also see that being never commanded, right? Cain is accountable for killing his brother, even though there was never any command given. There was not, right? And somehow that he's expected that he knows that it's wrong. So so humanity stands accountable to God both for what is commanded and what is not commanded. That's I think is that sort of introduced the earliest chapters of Genesis. We have the sin of the Tower of Migdal Bavel, the Tower of Babel. We have the first generation of the flood. There's a normative relationship with humanity. Okay, we have in these parshiot, these Torah portions that are coming up starting these weeks. We have the first the focus of the Torah narrows from being concerned with all humanity to be concerned just with the family of Abraham and Sarah, and we see this narrowing of the aperture and maybe that comes in the aftermath of the sin of the tower, right? All humanity was united in one place. They all had this sort of common. They went wrong, all of them in the same way, and the response is God scatters them across the earth. So whatever goes wrong or goes right, at least it'll be limited. Sam Shafel Hirsch, writing in the 19th century, says this is when God pivots to focus on the family of Abraham and Sarah, because if there's diversity of cultures and people are spread all over the world, so like they won't all go bad at once, but someone has to figure things out in the right way. And so And so Abraham and Sarah were given like a head start, or we have, we're a special relationship with them and their family and their descendants, ultimately with the goal of God maintaining a concern for every human being, for all of creation, um, but not trying any longer to deal with humanity in a collective. That like when didn't go well with the first people. It didn't go well with Noah and his descendants. Didn't go well with the generation of the tower. So the Torah really pivots, starting in the chapters that we're reading in these weeks now. Really, Abraham and Sarah and their children, and they seem to have some special practices, specific devotion to God, certain piety, trust in God, but no, not necessarily. We don't necessarily see any special commands given to the family of Abraham and Sarah, which eventually becomes the children of Jacob, the children of Israel. The book of Genesis ends. The children of Jacob go sent to Egypt. They become a nation there. The book of Exodus begins with these 70 people becoming a nation in Egypt, being subjected to slavery in Egypt, being brought out of Egypt by God. And then we have this moment at Sinai where God reveals the Torah. So this is probably the most, I think, important turning point in world history from the Jewish perspective. This moment where the Torah is given to us, that it's not just again a relationship with a family, a relationship with a nation that is trying to make its way in the world and do well and do good, but the content of our relationship with God is primarily or substantially defined. The contours are shaped through the mitzvot of the Torah. Um, and the Jewish understanding of the revelation of the Torah um, is a Torah that includes written and oral forms. They were, and this distinguishes our ancestors from various other Jewish groups that were existing in the ancient world. This understanding that in following the Torah, we also have not just the written Torah, which is we have in the scrolls in the Ark in the synagogue, but the oral Torah, which was conveyed in non-written form, generation to generation, and eventually was collected and eventually made its way into books and fills the shelves, behind me and all around me. Okay, so let's say a little bit about if we're all if all of you were here in person, we'd like walk and we'd like look at the Torah scroll. Okay, we'd pull it out of the ark and we look at it. So I hope all of you have seen a Torah scroll. If not, you can look at one on Shabbat. Um, Torah scroll, it's letters on parchment. What does the Torah scroll not have?
Vowels and chant marks.
Yeah, no vowels, no chant marks, no punctuation. So even the way the letters are supposed to be pronounced is not contained in the written Torah. The written, right? Just like what is oral Torah? Oral Torah is like how the words sound when you read them. That's also part of oral Torah, and that actually wasn't written down until the Middle Ages. It was in the Middle Ages where, for the first time, people decide, oh, actually, it would be helpful if we had a book where we invented a way, if we invented a way, a notation system for recording visually what it sounds like when the Torah is read. And those were the Masoretes who invented what we call the vowels, the vocalization marks, and the cantillation marks. That was invented in the 9th century, 10th century, I don't know, in Tiberias, okay? And that's part of oral Torah. It was just an oral tradition. This is what it sounds like when the Torah is read. We have the letters and the spaces between the letters, which make words. But what it actually sounds like when you read those words, which means how those words are pronounced, which can mean the difference of meaning as well, past tense, future tense, present tense, right? Like can all be just different vocalizations of the same letters, where you pause for the middle of a sentence for a comma, where you pause at the end of a sentence. That's all can dramatically change the meaning of the letters. That's all oral tradition. That was oral tradition. And that, we have a few places in the Torah. We have more places in the rest of Scripture where there's a discrepancy between the way the words and the way their sound. It's called a kriyuktiv, where there's these two traditions contradict each other, and it's like maybe an added layer of meaning in that contradiction. There are several instances in the Torah and many more in Scripture, but that's the result of these two distinct, independent traditions: the letters and the words, and how they sound. So that's one piece of oral Torah, right? Like what it sounds like when you read these words. Oral Torah also, what else like or gives us the necessary context to understand what the written Torah tells us. Written Torah tells us 3 times, don't boil a kid in its mother's milk. The oral Torah comes and tells us that means you can't cook dairy and meat together, or eat dairy and meat that has been cooked together, or derive benefit from dairy and meat that have been cooked together. Because the three times the Torah says, "Thou shalt not boil a kid in its mother's milk." So just have those words. Who knows what they mean? It can mean many things. The oral tradition tells us what they mean. The Torah tells us that the holiday of Shavuot is celebrated 7 weeks after Mimacharat HaShabbat, the day after the Sabbath. You count 7 weeks and you celebrate Shavuot. What does the day after Sabbath mean? Sunday. You might think that, but you're wrong. Okay. In this context, the day after the Sabbath means the first day of Passover is called a Sabbath. It's a day when we don't do work. And that's our oral tradition telling us. So Shavuot is always 7 weeks after Passover, regardless of whatever day of the week Passover falls on. There were other ancient Jews, like in contrast, there were early Christians who celebrate Pentecost always on a Sunday. They think the morrow of the Sabbath means the first Sunday after Passover. And there were ancient Jewish sects as well who also celebrated Shavuot in that way. So the oral tradition, without the oral tradition, we can't actually live our lives based on the written Torah. The written Torah doesn't give us enough detail, doesn't give us enough context to follow it, to make sense of it. And so there's a need for an oral tradition as well. Now, the content of the oral tradition, there's actually a range of opinions on what the content of the oral tradition is. There are some on one end of the spectrum, the sort of the theology, the religious vision is God gave Moses the written Torah and a little bit of additional information as well that was transmitted orally, and said, I want you now to use the tools of hermeneutics, of human reason and literary analysis, and figure out what this means. And so the oral tradition based on this primarily was generated by all of the debates and investigations that we have records of in rabbinic literature. And so based on this side of things, of the spectrum, much of the oral Torah was generated over time by our ancestors' good faith efforts to understand what the Torah means. The other end of the spectrum, no, actually the revelation of the oral Torah was comprehensive. And so Moses knew that Shavuot could be any day of the week. Moses knew that don't boil a kid in its mother's milk meant you can't cook any dairy or meat together or eat it if it's been cooked together or derive benefit from it if it's been cooked together. And the efforts that what we see in rabbinic literature where these meanings, these interpretations are explicated and derived, that was just an ex post facto tying back an independent, comprehensive law to the written Torah. We know what the law is, we know what to do, and we just have to, like, our task as scholars is to tie that back to the written Torah. Both of these opinions are tested in classic rabbinic thought and it's in Jewish theology and thinking about this, and it was I would say what they have in common is a belief in the oral Torah as being binding and being authentic. So even if you think it was generated, it still was generated in the process endorsed by God that we're meant to interpret and derive new meanings from the written Torah. And the advantage of this side of the spectrum is that you understand what all of those debates that we have in rabbinic literature were about. They actually didn't know the law until they figured out the meaning. On the other hand, the other side, it's sort of, we understand, like, okay, like God gave us all the information we needed, like it told us what to do, and that was transmitted faithfully orally for generation after generation until, and then the rabbinic project that we have in Talmudic literature is just, again, ex post facto tying back. I said a lot of things. Any just questions, comments from people online or in the room, please feel free to either post a question in the chat or to unmute yourself and share. And anyone in the room is also welcome to offer a question or comment. Yes. Long later, much later. We'll get there. Much later. Thousands of years later. Okay. Good. Thank you for asking. Not much later. Any questions, comments?
Can I ask a quick question?
Please. Yeah.
Why did they wait until the 9th or 10th century to start doing the written Torah? Like, why the big gap?
Yeah. So great question. This particular project of like adding vowels and punctuation and cantillation marks to the written Torah, it's a great question. I have no idea why. My guess is they feared it would, like, they're advanced. Look, my wife works for the Sefaria, the online library of Jewish texts. Okay, if you don't know the website, it's a good website. It's there on the. So she speaks a lot about like technology in the context of Jewish education. Like that's her job there, and technology is actually like like writing down the can't that's technology. Like a book is technology. Like a codex is technology. A scroll is technology. And what she always says is that like technology is about affordances for like what task you're trying to do. So imagine you're setting a table for a meal. If you're serving soup at the meal, like a spoon is a really useful piece of technology to have at that table. If you are like not serving soup, like a spoon is really not so helpful, right? So it's really a question of like what technology meets the needs that you have. So if you have a situation where, okay, it's really helpful, and or if you don't have it in written form, so what does that give you? Like every person who's learning Torah is learning from a mentor. It's entirely personal, right? If you want to study Torah, there are no books that exist because nobody writes this down. It's considered wrong to write down the oral Torah. So if you want to grow in knowledge, you have to find a mentor, and you become his disciple for the next 10 years, and you memorize all the information from your mentor. So that's like incredibly powerful because all Torah is then like embedded in this like really, really deep relationship of student and mentor. The advantage of writing stuff down is you could spread it much more broadly. More people have access to it. Um, Maybe it's a little more stable, doesn't get corrupted by memory, right? So it's just a question of like different priorities, different times. But the oral Torah in general, however, was written down. But let me get to that in just a moment. That's letter D. But let me get to okay. Jonathan, yeah?
I was just gonna add, isn't it Yehuda Hanasi
Yes.
combating Christianity, and he felt that the knowledge was going to die if he didn't write the Mishnah.
So that's letter D, and I don't think Christianity has anything to do with it. We'll get there.
Oh.
Okay. Okay. Lily was asking specifically about a thing. In the year 200, the Mishnah is codified. Okay. The Mishnah was codified around the year 200. Lily was asking about something that happened much later, which was the Masoretic project of inventing vowels for Hebrew, okay? Which came in, I think, the 9th or 10th century. They were called the Masoretes. Masoretes, you can look them up in an encyclopedia and find out when they lived, okay? Masoretes. And the system I think we used is called the Tiberian Masoretic system, I think. I think I'm spelled right if you want to Google that, whatever, okay? Okay, but we're all Yehuda Nasi. We'll talk about him in a moment. But first, let me just do letter C, Midrash Halacha, Midrash Agadah. Okay, there are this project of like oral Torah, explicating, figuring out, deriving. So there are two different forms of this genre of midrash. Midrash is the Hebrew word for derivation, explication. Okay, there's midrash halacha, midrash agadah. Midrash halacha, the explication of halacha of law, is when you're figuring out how to observe mitzvot, how to do the thing. What's the normative meaning of this verse? The Torah says observe the Sabbath. What do we do? What does that mean? The Torah says don't boil a kid in its mother's milk. What does that mean? So this project, if it says this here, it says that there, this means this means that. Let's, da da da, outcomes, this result, it must mean XYZ, that, or plus the traditions that we have about what things mean. That's called Midrash Halacha. We're explicating, deriving new meanings from the verses in the Torah that are about law. And we're figuring out what to do, how to observe them in a more detailed way. Midrash Agadah is when we're filling in stories in the Torah, the narrative parts of the Torah. We're filling in the stories. And so, for example, we're going to read in synagogue this Shabbat, every synagogue in the world. The portion is Lech Lecha. Begins, God says to Avram, go from your native land to the land that I will show you, da 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 da. Okay, so why did God pick Avram? Okay, the story kind of begins in the middle. What's so special about Abraham? What did he do to deserve this being chosen in this way? So the Midrash comes in and fills in a backstory. He has an origin story. Okay, it's not explicit. Right. It's not anywhere in the written Torah. The Midrash fills in those gaps, and those gaps are all answering questions that emerge organically from the text for the most part. Often they hinge on a superfluous word or a curious change of turn of phrase, a plot hole that needs to be filled in. Okay, so that's Midrash Agadah. Midrash Halacha, Midrash Halacha generally is binding. Once the rabbis tell us how to observe, the date of Shavuot, that's when Shavuot is observed. Midrash Agadah, the filling in the narrative gaps, I don't think that's binding. You don't have to believe that they're true, but they are ancient traditions that are answering questions that a sensitive reader would have when confronting the text of the Torah and its stories. Yes.
Talked about a sort of a continuum.
Yes.
And it seems like Midrash Haggadah and Midrash
Mhm.
Halacha are those, in a way, sort of track, parallel, echo those extremes, because Halacha is, it's given, it is.
Good. I would say that there are two different axes. So you have to make a more complicated graph. Yeah, because there's the Midrash Halakha is binding, even if it was derived by when Rabbi Akiva was arguing about does chicken count as meat for the prohibition of against eating dairy and meat together? So that wasn't known until the rabbis of Rabbi Akiva's generation had their debate about it. But once it was, is it a biblical prohibition? Is it a rabbinic prohibition? Is it permissible? A three-way debate in the time of the generation of Rabbi Akiva, and nobody knew the answer until they decided the answer. The answer didn't exist until they decided. Once they decide, the answer is binding for all time. It's a rabbinic prohibition. Which doesn't mean, which is a separate question from whether or not Moses knew.
True.
Okay?
Yes.
Moses might not have known until it was decided in the generation of Rabbi Akiva, or he did know and it was forgotten and they had to figure it out and revive it, whatever it might be. Okay? Yeah, John.
Yeah, does Midrash Rabbah and Midrash Tanchuma fall into Agadah?
Excellent. The Midrash Rabbah and Midrash Tanchuma are both examples of Midrash Agadah, absolutely. And the Mechilta is an example of Midrash Halacha. Very good. The rabbinic library has several different books in each genre. Interestingly enough, the Babylonian Talmud mixes all these genres together, which is fascinating because rabbis knew how to sort their books by genre if they wanted to, and they chose not to do that when putting together the Babylonian Talmud, which is a fascinating choice, like editorial choice. Very good. Okay, so what other terms? Oh, Dioraita, Dirabbanan. Okay, so Dioraita, I'm going to say, is Aramaic for from the Torah, and it means that a mitzvah has the legal status as though it were a Torah rule. It doesn't mean it's explicit in the Torah like you go up to a guy in the street and you say, look at this book. Is it prohibited to eat, to cook a cheeseburger? They'll say no, because it doesn't say that explicitly in the Torah. But from our perspective, it is a biblical prohibition because we derive it from biblical verses, as opposed to eating chicken and dairy together, which we understand is a rabbinic prohibition. That's not contained in the Torah's prohibition. That is an added level that the rabbis wanted to safeguard the Torah mitzvah by adding that prohibition. Fence around the Torah, exactly. So these are legal terms. Okay, they're all binding, they're all authoritative. We do them all, but there's different legal terms. And the truth is, in the earliest stages of rabbinic scholarship, this distinction doesn't seem to be explicitly made. In the later stages of Talmudic scholarship, they are sorting Jewish observance into these categories of Dioraita, Dirabbanan. What is the legal authority of the Torah? What is the legal authority of the rabbis? Because from who taught it to us, it's all from the rabbis. Okay. Letter D in our little syllabus. Writing down the oral tradition. So Jonathan already mentioned Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi. Yehuda Hanassi is the leader of, I guess maybe it would be sort of interesting. We're not doing this. We're not teaching this in the context of like anything else happening in Jewish history. We're sort of skipping over, I don't know. You should read the Hebrew Bible. You'll get the first part of the Jewish history, Moses, and then the kings and the prophets, and the destruction of the temple, the exile, the Babylonian exile. Okay, the kingdom established by David and Solomon eventually is destroyed. Its last remnants by the Babylonians in the year. Anyone know? Okay, 586 BCE. Okay. 70 years later, the Babylonian Empire is conquered by the no.
Assyrian?
The Persians, guys, the Persians. Okay. And the emperor is Cyrus. Cyrus gives permission for the Jews to rebuild the temple and to 70 years after the destruction. So 586 BCE. 70 years later brings us to 86 minus 70. 5 what? 516, 516, 516,
516.
516 BCE, because the numbers go smaller, or BCE.
Right.
Okay. And they have a little bit of a kingdom, a little vassal state within the Persian Empire. And we actually know very little about the Persian period. And then we have the Hellenistic period. Alexander, what is Alexander? Alexander conquers the world in what year? I forget. I always forget this one. This one I don't remember. Anyone know? Alexander?
506.
What? Sorry? What did you say? I couldn't hear.
Mhm.
All right, for our person, it doesn't matter. Though actually, it was a really big deal. In fact, all in the ancient world, all contracts were dated to the date of Alexander's conquest. At the time of the Talmud, they assume it's called minyan shtarat. The dating of contracts is dated from Alexander's. Alexander was nice to the Jews. He sort of gave religious freedom to the Jews, and in turn, we made Alexander a Jewish name. So it's a Jewish name, okay? In appreciation of Alexander the Great. Okay, but then he dies very young. He gets bitten by a mosquito and gets something like that, malaria or something. I don't know. Dies in India, and he gives his kingdom to his three generals, the Seleucids and the Ptolemies and the Macedonians, and they fight over his kingdom. They fight in Eretz Yisrael because it's right in the middle, and that's where you get the Hanukkah story. Okay, that's like a generation or two after Alexander, and all of this, the Maccabees, sort of are somewhat victorious. But a generation or two later, they're fighting amongst themselves, and there's a pretty brutal civil war. And they bring in the Romans to help settle their civil war, and that's when it's what's his face, Anthony. Anthony is as he's Mark Antony, ultimately conquers Eretz Yisrael and sort of brings this little squabbling disaster of self-government to an end, and that's the Roman period. Okay, there's a revolt against the Romans in the year 67 of the Common Era, where now the numbers are getting bigger. The temple's destroyed the year 70, but Jews remain the dominant ethnic group in Eretz Yisrael even afterwards. There's another revolt in the year, I want to say 115, thereabouts, the so-called Bar Kokhba revolt. This one is suppressed by the Emperor Hadrian, and there's also a period of real brutal persecution, but, Jews still remain, and a sort of strong presence in Eretz Yisrael. And this is the period after the suppression, like really several generations later, in the year 200. So it's 130 years after the destruction of the temple. It's 2 generations after the Bar Kokhba revolt and the death of Rabbi Akiva and people of that generation. The Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, he's the Nasi, he's the patriarch, he's the prince. That means that he had a position. The Romans put him in charge of the Jews. He had a political power and great wealth in addition to being a scholar. And he decides that the oral tradition should be organized and codified. And he is the personality behind the Mishnah, which is the organized codification of the oral Torah. It was not, we think, consigned to writing. He published the Mishnah as an oral book. That's the common understanding. And it was a number of generations later before any rabbinic literature was in a significant way consigned to writing. It was just, by publishing a book, he just meant he organized it, he edited it, and he told people to memorize it and to go and teach it to others. And that's how things were done then, right? So, but it still nonetheless represents a kind of dramatic shift in like organizing the oral Torah, that had to be less to be forgotten in vicissitudes of persecution and wars and empire. Okay, it had to be like organized more carefully, and that's the Mishnah.
It's almost like we're coming to terms with we've lost all. Now we have to figure out how to go forward.
Yeah. I guess I can share in the chat. Like if you haven't looked at Mishnah, I can share a link to the Mishnah. Okay, I'm sorry.
Was he related?
According to some traditions, Yehuda Nasi was a descendant of the royal house of David. Correct. That is assumed to be true. Correct. Yeah.
Was any part of at the very beginning, you say it was all oral and memorization. Was there any written outline?
I don't know. I don't think so. We have a story. I think not. I just think that's how I think that's how people learned back then. That's how they, You know, people are capable of memorizing that. We know, you can see if you read the Mishnah, you can see that it was edited for easy memorization in terms of the patterns in the language and the style and the way it's organized. It was organized for easy memorization. And so if you've never studied the Mishnah, you should study some Mishnah. You should look at some Mishnah. I gave you a link. You can sort of poke around. What you'll see about the Mishnah is that it is, maybe we'll look at a Mishnah. Let me put one off the shelf. Yeah. The Mishnah is it's I think the word they use is apodictic, which means it just tells you what to do without much explanation. So there's no derivation. There's no all the stuff we talked about in the midrashic tradition of deriving and arguing. None of that's in the Mishnah. It just tells you bottom level law. However, okay, that's one thing about the Mishnah. Second of all, it's actually not very useful as a law code because it contains multiple opinions and doesn't tell you which one is right. Third thing about the Mishnah is that it assumes you know the entire Mishnah. Okay. For example, the very beginning, okay, this is an English translation. This is one version of the Mishnah. This is Brachot. Okay. So this is the first Mishnah in the Mishnah. Okay. Begins as follows. Okay. What time of night do we say the evening Shema recitation? Okay. From when we recite the Shema in the evening? Okay, so what does this presume? It presumes there's a mitzvah to recite the Shema, okay, in the morning and in the evening, okay, and it presumes that there's a specific time to say it. Okay? It presumes you know what the Shema is, what it entails, and how to say it, okay, and it's just asking, it just starts in the middle. What is the time of night when, and what's the answer? When the Kohanim enter to eat their truma, okay, a Kohen, a priest who became ritually impure and waited and went to the mikvah, and he's waiting for nightfall in order to be pure again so he can eat his sacred tithed produce. Okay, that's the time of night when you should say the evening Shema. So it presumes a lot of information. Okay, it's not, you would never organize like a code of law or any guide to any topic that way. All right, it starts in the middle, assumes you know everything else. So that does mean if you're learning Mishnah or any oral Torah, the more you learn, the better. It's like a jigsaw puzzle, and each quanta of information that you learn, like helps fill in that picture until eventually things start, clicking together, and you know what truma is, you know what a kohen is, you know what okay, but it's organized for other principles, not for the way we would organize something. Okay, yeah, it's not organized conceptually, it's not organized chronologically, it's organized based on some other principles. Okay, and so as soon as the Mishnah was edited and disseminated, the project began of trying to understand the Mishnah. Okay, like questions like, where do we know this? How do we know this? Like, where's the obligation of saying Shema? Where does it come from? Or why is it Mr. Fraser say? Why does it talk about the evening Shema before it talks about the morning Shema? Shouldn't you start in the morning? Questions like, it says this over here in this Mishnah, but over there it says something else, which seems to contradict it. How do we reconcile this contradiction? Or here's this other text, this other rabbinic tradition that never made it into the Mishnah, wasn't included in the Mishnah, but we know it's an authoritative ancient text. Like, how do we reconcile? Let's throw that into the mix. That project of discussions around the Mishnah eventually becomes the Talmud or the Gemara. Okay, and that's the Gemara is basically the edited conversations about the Mishnah, trying to make sense of it, that took place over the 350 years following the publication of the Mishnah as an oral book. Okay, that process happened twice. It happened in Eretz Yisrael, in Greco-Roman Palestine, and that's called the so-called Jerusalem Talmud or the Palestinian Talmud. And it happened in Sasanian Babylonia. That's called the Babylonian Talmud. The Babylonian Talmud is better because they had more time to work on it, and it got nice and edited in a more easy to understand way. But this process happened twice. So not the entire Mishnah was not subject to this treatment of being turned into Talmud, but much of it was. Not the same sections were not subject to this process. In the land of Israel, they studied certain topics, and Babylonia, they studied other topics, and some overlap and not exclusively overlap. But that is that process. Okay. Yes.
What's the time frame for these Talmud?
So the Mishnah is edited around the year 200. I think the Palestinian Talmud, maybe that the work on that maybe grinds to a halt maybe 250 years later. So that's in the 5th century. The Babylonian Talmud, I think we think gets edited in the 6th century. So the final editorial stage. I think we don't really know. There was a plague in Babylonia in like the year 527 or something, which is not mentioned anywhere in the Talmud. So that suggests that it was finished before. But we don't really know for sure. And there's a lot of scholarship about exactly how the Talmuds became codified, put together, edited, what that process looked like.
And did this also start out as just?
Yes, yes, this was oral for a long time. We don't exactly know when it was consigned to writing, but relatively late, surprisingly late to us. Yeah. Yeah. And so if you look at letter F in Roman number 1, Mishnah, Gemara, Tanaim, Amrim. So Mishnah is that earliest stage, that first stage of the oral Torah codified by Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi. The scholars who are mentioned in the Mishnah are called Tanaim. So people like Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yossi, they all lived in Greco-Roman Palestine. And that period culminates in the editing of the Mishnah in the year 200. The scholars who took over afterwards and like debated the Mishnah and discussed it and are named in the Talmud, the Gemara, either the Babylonian Talmud or the Palestinian Talmud, like those are called Amoraim. People like Rabbi Yochanan, people like Reish Lakish, people like Abaye, people like Rava. These are all Amoraim. Okay. Whew. Questions, comments? Yes.
One back on the Doraita and Derabanan.
Yes.
If and you had that sort of continuum, suppose you're somebody who believes that Moses knew everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so then isn't everything then from the Torah and there's no such thing as Derabanan?
Oh, good. So I think even for that position, you would say that there was still room for rabbinic legislation. I think you'd say that was not. So you would say the rabbinic legislation was, so everything that can be traced down to a verse in the Torah, Moses knew, but the rabbis still legislated to make a fence around the law, to protect the law or whatever other reason they did legislation. It's a good question. Okay, let's do one more letter, and then we may have to pause. G, the Gaonic system. So once the Talmud is completed, we skipped. End of ordination, new calendar. Why is that? Yeah. Okay. At some point, good. At some point in this period, and they fear Moses ordains Joshua as his successor with laying of hands, and this transmission of rabbinic authority from teacher to student continues for centuries. In the Talmudic period, it's somehow in the midst of Roman persecution, that form of ordination dies away, and so we no longer actually have. Already mid-Talmudic period, we no longer have rabbis with the full authority of rabbis to do things like impose fines, right? Only you can do, a court can make you pay damages, can make you pay what you owe, but can't impose fines beyond what you owe, because courts don't have full authority anymore. And the old courts with ordained rabbis would declare the new moon, right? And set the calendar based on the new moon. Without ordained rabbis, instead, we have a fixed calendar, which so we don't, the Torah system is the Jewish calendar is dependent on witnesses seeing the moon, coming to the court, saying they saw the moon, and the court confirming, okay, you saw the moon last night, today is the first of the month. In the absence of a court of ordained rabbis sitting in Jerusalem, we switched over to a fixed calendar. So some months are 29 days, some months are 30 days, and it more or less works out and corresponds to the natural phenomenon. Yeah.
Let's track with the secular history in terms of, the conquest by the Romans, and are people being scattered?
Yeah. I think part of this effort to codify and to publish is this fear of scattering and the diaspora and et cetera. Absolutely. The difficulty of maintaining ordination, according to the Talmud, is the product of persecution as well. And our versatility of tenaciously continuing our traditions is a response to that. Vera? Yeah. So the Sanhedrin was in this early rabbinic period, maybe even before the time of of the classic rabbinic period. Before the Mishnaic period, the Sanhedrin was sitting in the Sanhedrin classically sat in Jerusalem during the time of the temple. Sanhedrin went into exile as well and existed, but we don't hear references to a Sanhedrin as, I think, the number of Jews involved in this process kind of gets lower and gets more spread out. Yeah. Yeah, John.
Yeah, if you could explain like a position like Ohev Yosef and what did he do? And how did he, because he had a leadership position, how was he ordained?
Yeah, so ordination continues, but not real ordination. No rabbi from the time of this, there's no laying of hands, teacher to student, and therefore no rabbi can impose fines or and we're not doing calendar manipulation either. What modern ordination means is authorization to teach Torah by your teachers.
Is that like a voting system?
Yeah, it can be. In some places, it was very informal. It was a teacher decided, you've learned enough. You can, I authorize you to go and teach Torah and tell people what's permissible and what's forbidden. And in some places, it became a little more formalized with like yeshivot or schools sort of having more formal processes, like a degree, like a more formal degree and the more formal process. But classically, it was more just personal. Like a teacher would say to a student, "Okay, you've studied enough that I trust you to go and exercise authority." Somebody like Ohev Yosef, or a really prominent rabbi with tremendous authority, that is entirely democratic, grassroots, bottom up. There is no hierarchical authority in Judaism that designates certain rabbis' opinions as more important than others. There are rabbis whose opinions are more important than others, but it's entirely generated by who people ask questions to. Ohev Yosef became like Ohev Yosef because people asked him a lot of questions and he answered them, and people trusted his answers. And over time, more and more people came to trust his answers about more and more topics of greater significance. And that's how he became somebody who 1,000 years from now, people will study his writings. But it's entirely from the bottom up, which is, I think, really interesting. It's not like, oh, you are on the official, somebody appointed you to the official board of important rabbis. You become an important rabbi because people ask you questions. If there's a rabbi you want to make important, you should ask him questions, right? No, seriously, right? I mean, that's the process, right? Like the people I ask questions to, like by asking them questions, their authority is growing, and hopefully they'll publish some of their answers and they're like I've already made it into the published book as a questioner. So like I feel like I got my piece of posterity by I asked a shaila to somebody who published my question in a book. So right. All right, maybe let's pause here. Okay, we did Roman numeral 1 letters A through E, and next week we'll pick up and do F, G, H, I, J. Okay, we'll pick up with F next week. We did touch on it. Oh, we did F. Sorry, we did F. Exactly, we did F. Thank you. We did F. So we'll pick up with G next week, and maybe even we'll finish Roman numeral 1 next week. We'll take as long as we have to. Like I'm not available every single Monday, but every Monday that I'm available, we'll meet and we'll do as long as we have to until we finish the curriculum. I do not need those back. You're welcome to take them. I don't know. Some of them are, some of them aren't. Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to end the recording.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is like